Hello everyone, and welcome to Get Ready for AIDS 2024, a webinar on how to write an abstract for a conference and for a manuscript in the scientific journal. This is organized by the Journal of International AIDS Society together with the IAS Educational Fund. My name is Alberto Rossi, and I'm the managing editor of the Journal of International AIDS Society, and together with me is Anna.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. As Alberto said, my name is Anna. I'm a senior technical advisor with IAS, and I'm here today in my capacity as a deputy editor of the Journal of the International AIDS Society. So welcome to this webinar, Getting Ready for AIDS 2024.
Thank you, Anna. So during this webinar, we'll give you an overview on how to write a good abstract and what are the important elements that are part of an abstract. At the end of this workshop, we will share with you a survey, and we'll be grateful if you could spend a minute to fill out this survey. This is important for us so we can improve on the next workshops, and this is going to also help the authors because we can optimize the way we can support our audience. For those that need to leave a bit earlier, we can share the link in the survey in the chat. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A functionality in Zoom, and we'll try to respond to as many as possible at the end of the workshop. So as I mentioned, this is organized together with the Educational Fund department at the International AIDS Society. So a little introduction about the Journal of the International AIDS Society. Excuse me. Our aim is to provide a platform for dissemination of essential HIV research and to encourage submission from low and middle income countries. And last but not least, our goal is to provide capacity building opportunities for less experienced authors, such as the workshop that we are doing today. Our journal is online only, it's peer-reviewed, it's open access, which means that everyone can read and download our articles for free. Our latest impact factors is 6.0. It's indexed in the major repositories, such as PubMed. It's multidisciplinary, meaning that we cover from social science to clinical science, modeling, epidemiology, and so on. And as I mentioned before, one of the goals of the journal is to provide skills building opportunities. We do also have supplements. You can see some of the covers of the supplements published this year in this slide, and we encourage you to check those in our website. These are a collection of articles focused on specific topics. So the agenda for today is to describe what is the abstract structure and how to write each of the elements in the abstract. We're going to cover some HIV terminology, and then we're going to move more specifically into the abstract submission, review, and selection process, particularly for AIDS 2024, the conference that is planned for next year in Munich, Germany. And then, as I mentioned before, we will have a Q&A session at the end. So, how to write a conference abstract. So we usually use this quote, which we think applies very well. The key to writing a good manuscript is to tell a story. And of course, you can apply this also for an abstract. So the key to writing a good abstract is to tell a story. And we're going to try to show you how to tell a good story. So what is an abstract? An abstract is it includes all the important details and data from your research so that it can serve as a standalone summary of your work. And this standalone summary element is particularly important because you want to make sure that the readers, by reading just the abstract, have a good idea of what your research was. So it needs to be an independent piece. It's not something that the reader will need to read something else in order to understand what you did. Of course, they will then read the paper if they're interested, and they will get more details, but the abstract is an independent, standalone piece. The abstract should only convey the most interesting and most important part of your work. It's brief, so make sure you only include the most interesting and most important part of your work. An abstract follows a structure with 5 elements: the title, introduction, methods, results, and conclusion. And from now on, we will describe each of these sections in detail and give you some recommendations in order to make them nicely written. So we will try to make this workshop, it's virtual, but we're going to try to make this somewhat interactive. And we will have poll questions that we ask you to respond using the Zoom functionality. So the first question that we have for you today is, what is the most important part of a conference abstract? Is it the title, the introduction, the methods, the results, or the conclusion? And we can now launch the poll question number 1. There you go. So we'll give you, 30 seconds to think about this. And don't be shy, the responses are anonymous, so no one will know what you decided to respond. Okay, I'll give another 10 seconds. I'll see that 60% of you responded. Again, don't be shy. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now. And I believe you can now see the results. So 45% of you indicated that the title is the most important part of an abstract. And the answer is yes, we believe the title is the most important part of the abstract. Why? Because the title discloses all the basic information and will help the reader decide if they want to read the full abstract or not. So if the title is catching the reader attention, it's very likely that the reader will continue on reading the abstract. If the title is not catching the reader's attention, most likely they will not read the full abstract. So how do we write a good title? So again, as I mentioned before, the title is the part that is most often read and often the only part read. So the title needs to summarize your work in about 30 words. It needs to include the what, where, who, and how. It needs to be short, specific, representative, and informative. And you need to see your title as a mini advertisement of your abstract or your paper. Again, this is the part most often read, but only if the title is interesting, the reader will continue on with the full abstract. You don't need to present your lesson learned or recommendations in the title. That can be done in the abstract or the full paper. And now we have another question for you. So we're going to read this title, and then we're going to ask you, if this is a good title and eventually what parts are missing. So factors that influence reinitiation or complete discontinuation from a daily oral prep use, a qualitative study from Eastern Cape Province in South Africa. So here's a question for you. What kind of information is missing from this title? The what, the where, the who, or the how? And we can launch the poll. I will give you 30 or 40 seconds to think about this. Okay, another 10, 15 seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. And I will show the result. So 62% of you indicated that the who is missing from this title. So let's try to dissect the title and see each element on it. So we have the what, which is factors that influence reinitiation or complete discontinuation from a daily oral prep use. We have the how, which is a qualitative study, and we have the where, Eastern Cape Province in South Africa. So as 62% of you indicated, the part missing in this title is the who, which is adolescent girls and young women. So that what you can see now is the original title of this JIAS publication, and we have intentionally modified in the previous slide, the title for the purpose of this exercise. So again, you want to make sure that your title includes these four elements: the what, the who, the where, and the how. And now the next part that we will discuss is introduction. I'm gonna hand it over to Anna.
Great, thanks, Alberto. So as you all know, the introduction is the first sentence or the first few sentences of your abstract. And the way you want to think about your introduction, both of an abstract or of a full manuscript, is kind of like an upside down triangle, meaning you want to start with a more general sentence and move to some specificity regarding what your study was about. Let me just see if I can advance slides. There we go. So as we looked at in the title, there are specific components of your research that we want to make sure. Apologies. Alberto, would you be able to go back and control the slides for me, please?
Sorry, I'm trying to remove this. Okay. Oops.
Great.
Sorry for this.
So there we go.
Okay.
So no problem. So in your introduction, you want to talk a little bit about the topic, which is what your research is about. And then you're going to get into something more specific. So you're going to talk about why the study was done and what the issue was. And then the last sentence of your introduction should really outline the why, or the aim of your study and what you are looking at to do. So we've given you some examples here, but again, you want to start with topic, then the issue, and then the aim of the study. Similarly, or we're going to talk about this a little bit later on, but as you know, abstracts have very specific word limits. And so you don't want to use too many of your words in your introduction. You really want to get to the point and make sure that these three questions are addressed. If you go to the next slide, please. Right. So as we were doing earlier, we're going to look at an introduction and see what's missing. So here we go. Adolescent girls and young women use pre-exposure prophylaxis. We sought to understand factors that influence AGYW's prolonged breaks in PrEP use and their decisions to reinitiate or discontinue using PrEP in the context of a community-based adherence support intervention. So here's our third poll. What's missing in this introduction? Do you think it's the topic? Do you think it's the issue? Or do you think it's the aim? And I'll give you a little bit of time to answer, and then we can discuss it further. Great. I see a number of you are voting and getting used to our polls. All right, good responses coming in. Okay, we can go ahead and end the poll and show the results. And Alberto, you can go to the next slide. And as you all voted, we agreed with you, and we said that the issue was missing from this introduction. So we've got the topic in purple, which is PrEP. We've got the aim of the study, which is seeking to understand factors that influence PrEP use among this community. But what's missing is the issue, or why this is relevant, essentially. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that, in fact, this abstract did include the issue. We just removed it for the purposes of this quiz. And the issue is that adolescent girls and young women face barriers that jeopardize their effective use of prevention commodities, right? And so it's important that the why is part of your introduction. Next slide. Now, the methods is really where you get into the meat of your abstract. Methods are incredibly important to be very transparent and very clear about, because we really can't judge an abstract unless we know how the research was conducted. And so often we will recommend people read the methods section first to make sure it's relevant what the results were. Your methods also have a very kind of clear structure that you can look at, because they're all around the W questions, or the who, what, where, when, and also how. Methods are also importantly written in the past tense. And that's because methods are things that you've already done. So at the time of your abstract being submitted, this work has been done, this project has ended, and this is retrospective. So make sure you write in the past tense. So with the who, it's who are you studying? With the what, it's what did you measure and how did you measure it? And that's the how. The where would be the specificity around where the research took place. And the when, you want to be, again, as specific as possible. And this is really where I would recommend spending a fair amount of the number of words that you have in your abstract, because it's going to be important that people understood what you did, even if you only have a couple hundred words to describe your work. Next slide. Again, here, let's look at the methods section from this paper and look at what's missing. So remember all of our W's. So in-depth interviews were conducted with purposely selected adolescent girls and young women enrolled in the community prep study. Adolescent girls and young women were offered monthly prep for 2 years or 24 months at 2 community-based study sites. Interview guides were informed by the information, motivation, behavioral skills model, and data were analyzed using illustrative code reports and a case analysis. So here's our fourth poll question, as you can imagine. So is the how there, the who there, the where, the what, and the when? You can go ahead and I'm looking at your answers on my second screen here. And so really we're hoping that you'll use this table as kind of a guide when writing a method section to make sure that it can be, all of these questions are answered. While you're voting, I will also say that writing the methods section in some ways should be the easiest, because you know what your work is, you know what was done. And so in terms of what I write first, when I write an abstract, I'll often start with the method section, because it's the most clear cut and easy to explain, and also really important to the quality of the work. Okay, we can go ahead and stop the poll and go to our next slide. You can share the poll results. So we have the when. Now we have the when. We didn't have it before. And we didn't have the where before either. So it was both where and when, I think, that we're missing in this example. And here you can see in the actual version, they did have the dates and very specific, the month and the year. And then they did discuss exactly where in South Africa. So not just what province, but also what health district. And I think that, again, you can always check a method section to make sure it includes all of these. And the level of detail is really just going to be dependent on how many words that you have. Thanks. And please, can you go ahead to the next slide and back to Alberto for the results.
Thank you, Anna. So now we will discuss about the result section. So the results section should describe what you found with your study. Okay, what was the results of the question that you started with? So not all the data needs to be presented. Remember that this is a short summary, so only present the results that are important. And most importantly, I will say only the results that are relevant to your question. Okay, if something isn't relevant to answer the question that you started with, you don't need to include that in your abstract. Make good use of the statistical analysis. Be careful with the use of the word significant, because if you don't have a statistical analysis to support that, you should not be using it. And do not use vague terms such as some, many, a lot, a little bit. These are not scientific terms. Consider using visual representation for your data, such as figures and tables and graph whenever possible. Do not replicate, so do not use space in the text to put the numbers and then also put them in a graph or in a table. That's wasting your space. And choose between a table or a figure to represent your data. And we'll see later an example where what is best to use. Do not discuss results, that's for later. Do not repeat the methods, you already described them in the earlier section. Be precise and avoid speculation. So again, we're going to ask you to respond to a question. So here is a section of a result section from an abstract that we published. and we're asking you to tell us if what is wrong with this section of the results. Is it because the results are being discussed? Is it because the data is not specific enough? Or you think this is a perfect description of the results? I'll leave you a minute to read through this, and then we can start responding to the questions. Okay, another 10-15 seconds. You can see that there is one of the three that is the most popular so far. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now. I will share the results. And most of you, 52% of you, indicated that the data are not specific enough. So we're gonna now again to dissect. I'm going to stop sharing, and we will start dissecting this section. So as you can imagine, we have intentionally modified the results section for the purpose of this workshop. So we started by replacing a total of 229 children aged more than 6 years with many children. As you can imagine, many children doesn't really mean anything. So you want to be specific about the data that you use. And then we put more than 10 years. This is not accurate because the exact number is 12.3 with the IQR of 9.0, 14.7 years. So again, you can see the difference between more than 10 years and using a specific value with a statistical description next to it. I'm going to pick that another example. So we said most participants, and that's true because 98% is indeed most participants. But if you only say most participants, that doesn't really tell the reader exactly how many. So the correct version of it is most participants, and then you add the specific numbers. I'm going to jump at the end of this slide. So where it says mean RBC folate at more than 96 weeks was also higher. And then it goes with a difference using the statistical analysis. So in this case, you can see that the description was correct, but it was missing, higher than what. So make sure that this is clear to the reader, to what you are referring to. And also you can see that in the last sentence, the authors put there was no difference in the treatment arms, blah, blah, blah. So if there is no difference, that's also results. So you want to make sure that you include that. Okay. And now we're moving on the use of sex and gender analysis in, more in general in scientific research, but also that applies to abstracts. So sex and genders are two different things, and you want to make sure you use them, correctly in your abstract. Make sure you understand the difference between sex and gender, and we recommend that you check the resources that you can find in this slide. So the Canadian Institute of Health Research, and also the SAGR guidelines, sex and gender equity in research. If you do a study that only has one gender, one sex, please make sure you specify why, otherwise the reader will not know. Make sure to report your data in a disaggregated version, so separate gender and sex. And if you see an effect, make sure you specify in which of the gender or sex this effect is measured. And now on figures and tables. So this is a general slide that applies to abstracts for publications, so in scientific journals. And then we're going to see more specifically abstracts for the conference ACE 2024. So are abstracts and tables allowed, and do they count toward your word count limit? Well, you need to check the submissions guidelines. Some journals do not accept abstracts, do not accept figures and tables in abstracts, such as the Journal of the National AIDS Society. But some conferences do, so please do make sure that you check the submissions guideline for the journal or the conference you are submitting your abstract too. Can data be more clearly and concisely presented in a graph or a table? Yes or no. We'll see an example later. So you really need to be careful and intentional on how you use text, graph, and tables. And that applies to the next one. If you do decide to use tables and graph, make sure that these are easily understandable with all the information in a standalone format. So a graph, for example, needs to include the label on each axis, for example. For A724, you are allowed to include 2 tables or 2 graphs or 1 each. Please make sure to understand that this counts toward the word limit. And as I mentioned before, please note that most journals, JIAS included, do not accept figures and tables for an abstract for a scientific publication. So for example, how to choose whether you want to use a graph, a table, or a text. So let's look at this table. So you can see that there is 49% male, 51% female, and then there is Europe 21%, Asia 18%, and so on. So would you use in this case, a graph or a text or a table? In this case, we believe that the message is very nicely and concisely conveyed using text, such as workshop participants or gender balanced and geographically representative. So these are just few words, don't take much space or much of the word count, as opposed to a table that would count toward the word count much more. Then we have another example, and we have a question for you about this. So what do you think is the best way to describe these data? So is it the table on the left, or is it the graph on the right? And we can launch the poll. Okay, I can see there is a clear winner here. So another 10 seconds to respond to this. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now. So 68% of you indicated that the graph is a better way to share this data, and we agree with you on this. We believe that. Go to the next slide. We believe that it's a lot more intuitive to understand the data from this graph as opposed to the table. Okay, and then the last but not least important part of the abstract is the conclusions. So you want to make sure that your conclusions reflect on the data presented in the abstract. Do not refer to data that you have not presented in the abstract, because the readers will get lost. It needs to include the take-home messages. It needs to include some wider implication of your findings with some recommendations and future research. Do not include obvious statements. Do not repeat things that you have already included in the results section, and avoid overgeneralization. And this is the last poll question that we have for you. So this is a conclusion section from an article that we published in JIAS. So people living with HIV in the United States may soon have several options for long-acting antiretroviral therapy. Our results suggest that long-acting oral tablets will be preferred by many patients over the current daily oral treatment, while implants and injections with longer duration may be acceptable to some. Future research should investigate sources of preference heterogeneity and actual uptake of an adherence to long-acting antiretroviral products when available. So the question for you is whether this is a good question, this is a good section or not. Okay, I can say mixed feelings here. We are okay, another 10-15 seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. And we'll show the results. So you were a bit split here. 54% of you indicated that yes, this is a good conclusion section. whereas 46% of you indicated that is not. So as usual, we will dissect this and see if we think it conveys all the important messages. So the three parts that we suggested to be included in the conclusion section are take-home message, implication, and future recommendation. And we believe that this conclusion section includes them all. So we have a quick recap of the results. So there will be long-acting solutions. What does this imply? That people living with HIV will have options to decide from. And what are the future recommendations? Well, the authors in this case suggest that there should be more research to investigate what are the preferences about for different populations and products. So we believe that this conveys the abstract take-home messages very nicely. So to recap, I believe this is still me. So to recap, there are these parts in the abstract. So there's a title, which is not included in the slide. Then there is the introduction that has to describe the topic, the issue, and the aim. And then we have the methods, which need to describe the who, how, where, what, and when. So the 5 questions. The results, which should summarize the key findings specific to the objective of the research and to the research question that you started with. And then the conclusions, which need to include the main conclusion of the study, implications, and take-home message and recommendations for future research. And with this, I will hand it over to Anna again.
Great, thanks, Alberto. So I'm going to speak now a little bit about some of the important other components as you consider writing your abstract, as well as some of the specific advice and specific details regarding abstracts for AIDS 2024, given the title of the session today. So the first area I want to speak about a little bit is language. And we know that words matter and language is important. And this is also important for all of us as scientists, that we are intentional about the words that we use and the ways in which we refer to people. We're going to share some resources in the chat now from UNAIDS and from other organizations, as well as, I believe, the People First Charter, to kind of give some examples of the best approach at present for some of the common terms that we use. Language also evolves and changes over time. And so I think it's important that we all kind of stay up to date and acknowledge that just as science is our quest for the truth, we're always looking to treat people with more respect and understanding. And so language also evolves. Very importantly to us at the IAS and to the journal, as well as to our conference colleagues, is that we do not want to see the terms HIV infected. Generally, we don't want to see the word infected, cases, carriers, victims, or patients in abstracts that are submitted. So we really take a person-first approach, and we want to talk about people before we talk about their health conditions or other challenges that they might face. This is a handy list of things you should consider using and words that you shouldn't use. And some of this, much of this language is available both on the AIDS 2024 website, as well as in the UNAIDS terminology guidelines that was shared in the chat. Just to highlight, we talk about people living with HIV or people affected by HIV, and we talk about vulnerabilities rather than risk. And you can see here that we talk about client or clients instead of patients because of the passive connotation of patient. And throughout the words that we recommend, it's really, we're trying to put the person first. So instead of saying intravenous drug user, we would talk about a person who injects drugs, for example. I welcome any questions on this or on other content we've covered in the Q&A section, which is along the bottom, where you can answer, write your questions, and we'll either type responses or answer shortly. Next slide. We also want to spend a bit of time today talking about the importance of writing clearly and concisely. So scientific writing has a certain style, and it's not the same as if you were writing a short story or a poem or a text or a newspaper article, right? So we want to encourage people to use an active voice, to not start sentences with the word it, and to not use nouns when we could use the verb form of the word. So this takes time and this takes practice, but in general, what we want to do is ensure that you're deleting unnecessary words or needless words, and that you're getting to the point as quickly as possible. So often it might feel very constrained to only have 200 or 350 words for an abstract, but there are ways in which this does also encourage and promote writing clearly and nicely. So for example, you can see here this middle example, rather than saying, "It was decided that the experiment should be conducted on a random sample," you could simply say, "The experiment was conducted on a random sample." So just be direct, and that's the kind of tone that we're looking for in terms of scientific writing. Next slide. So some good practice and some common mistakes. You can hit the next button as well. As much as possible, I think it's really key that you keep the audience in mind. So who are you speaking to in your abstract? And so you're with an AIDS 2024 abstract, you're speaking to the audience that attends an AIDS conference. So these are going to generally be people that acknowledge that HIV is a public health threat, that have a little bit of background knowledge in their specific field. And so you don't need to spend a lot of time explaining why HIV is important, but you can focus more quickly on why your research is important. We also really encourage you to use friends and colleagues and co-authors to check your spelling and grammar and to comply with submission guidelines. So we will talk through what the abstract submission sections are, but it's important to follow the template provided. And in fact, I think you have to, given the way that the abstract upload system works. Similarly, I will say that it's important that methods are written in the past tense, that your results are what you observed, not what you'd hoped to observe, and not why you think they're important, but just the facts. And that in your conclusions, you're not overly grandiose or kind of being too ambitious in what you think your results proved. So make sure that they're not overly generalized or overly bold in terms of their impact. Next slide. We also want to highlight and start to discuss more the use of artificial intelligence. We know people are using this in some of their work, as well as plagiarism. So we do want to let everybody know that abstracts are put through different filters as our way of trying to understand if there has been any plagiarism or AI use. And we would also recommend refraining from using AI to generate your abstract. So think about and use other colleagues and feedback from people to ensure that you're getting the best out of your abstract and putting your best foot forward in terms of what you submit. And know that we do check for both plagiarism and use of AI with abstracts submitted to the journal and abstracts submitted to the conference. Next slide. So for AIDS 2024, I think it's the 24th AIDS conference, we are excited, and if you didn't know, to let you know that both registration and abstract submissions are now open. So you can search AIDS 2024 and you will find all of the details about the abstract submission process on the conference website. But let me walk you through some of the important ones. Next slide. So we opened this portal on the 15th of November. It will close just before midnight, Central European time, on the 23rd of January. And then we also have late breakers that open in April and close in May. So we really hope that you're all considering now what science you would like to submit to the conference. Next slide. At our conferences, we have two different types of abstracts, all right? So option one is the more traditional abstract format that's generally for all disciplines. And these abstracts have a background, methods, results, and conclusions section. So to answer one of the earlier questions in AIDS 2024, there's no discussion section in this abstract format. And then option two is more suited for lessons learned maybe through a program or policy or a project. And then you can look at the background, descriptions, lesson learned, and conclusions next steps. So we walked you through today option one, as this is the most commonly used format for our abstracts. Next slide. Just to let you know how the process works in terms of submission. So you would write your abstract and discuss it and get approval from all of your co-authors and potentially input from others on the quality and making sure that it's the best it can be. You would make an online profile with IAS, and then you would submit your abstract through your profile between now and the 23rd of January. And as part of that, you would choose what track it's part of and what subcategory. And I'll speak to you a little bit more about that. But basically, we want to know where it fits within the science that is sent to the conference. So at AIDS conferences, we have 6 tracks, which is really exciting. You've got everything from basic science to implementation science. And so what you're going to want to do with your co-authors is talk about what track your science fits into. And then within each of these, there is between about 5 and 15 subcategories. And this is just a way of making sure that similar research gets put forward into similar sessions, and that we have a qualified reviewer in your area to make sure that we have enough peer reviewers who are able to give real quality reviews of the science that's submitted. Next slide. This is also important, and I want to stress that IAS conferences all have a very rigorous peer review process for our abstracts. So we don't just select ones that are from our friends or from people we know, but in fact, each abstract has at least 3 external peer reviewers that looks at it. And it's that score and that aggregate score that is then sent on to a track committee of volunteers who are experts in their track field to review the scores and decide which abstracts become oral abstracts, which become oral posters, and which become posters or e-posters and in-person posters. And then next would be presenting it at the conference. So just know that it will go through peer review. Yes, you can go ahead and hit next slide. So again, just to highlight, and this might be a useful page as well, to know that we provide our peer reviewers with guidance. And so if your abstract fits into category 1, which was the type of abstract that we spoke about with you all today, we are asking the peer reviewers to look at whether or not there was a clear background and a justified objective, if the methods and the design was appropriate given the objectives of the study, if the results were clearly presented and important, if the conclusions were supported by the results, and if the study was original and contributes to the field. So those are the kind of things that we want to think about when you say, I wonder if my work is relevant. And I know there's one question, at least in the Q&A, about this. I would ask you to look at these questions and talk with your colleagues about whether or not you think it's right for submission to the AIDS conference. Next slide. This is also kind of sharing some behind the scenes secrets here, because I think it's important that we all know that part of submitting abstracts and manuscripts is that sometimes we are rejected, meaning that our work isn't accepted for inclusion in the conference or in a journal. So looking at some data from 2022, in red and green in the bars is the total number of abstracts submitted per track. And you see that these kind of vary from around 500 to more than 2,500 in track D. And that the acceptance rate was somewhere between 35 and 47% at 39% overall. So that meaning that, 4 in 10 abstracts were selected for the conference, but 6 in 10 weren't. And so it's quite a competitive process in order to have your science presented. Next slide. In addition, of the 2,500 abstracts selected, only 5% are oral abstracts, and that's in the red bar shown here. Another 12% are in the poster exhibition, and the majority are e-posters. So when your work is accepted and you're always getting posters, just know how hard it is. So you can think about it that of the 6,500 abstracts selected, there's really only about 100, not even, that have oral abstracts. And so it's an incredibly rigorous process to get an oral abstract at an AIDS conference. Next slide. I also just wanted to emphasize what late breakers are. So late breakers are science that is finished between the 23rd of January and April. So it's really a small number of research studies that are going to be eligible to be a late breaker. In 2022, there were 652 late breakers submitted and only 16% accepted. And so I would acknowledge that a large majority of these were not accepted because they weren't actually eligible to be late breakers. So if you're considering a late breaker, please make sure that you review what qualifies and either really work towards getting your work in by that 23rd of January deadline or considering submission to a different or a later conference. Next slide. I also want to highlight that there are a number of AIDS 2024 scholarship opportunities. The IAS is interested in ensuring increased access for all types of people in the HIV response to be part of our conferences. And we also do look and quite strongly consider abstracts, supporting scholarships for people who have accepted abstracts to the conference. So the scholarship submission system is already open. And you also can include your abstract number in your scholarship submission. And so I would strongly encourage you to complete these processes in parallel. And as soon as today, you can already look at the links that our colleagues have shared to see what is required within your scholarship submission. So it's not just your details. We also want to know why you want to attend. We want to know how you're going to share your learnings, and we request a letter of support. We have a huge number of scholarship applications every year to review as well. So recommend that you start this early and ensure that you have a quality submission with a great letter of reference that cites your abstracts so that we can see that in your profile when we're considering which scholarships we're rewarding to who. Next slide. So we're going to pause now and answer some questions from the chat, not from the chat, sorry, from the Q&A feature. So if you've put questions in the chat or can't put questions in the chat, you have to put them in the Q&A for Alberto and I to see them. And Alberto, is there something you wanted to start with, given that you've been able to look at the questions while I've been speaking for the last few minutes?
I've been responding to some of those. I think there was one, there was a person asking about the use of artificial intelligence to improve the writing style because they are not native speaker. It's a tool. It depends how you use that tool, because the level of revision that you get from artificial intelligence might get you in trouble if it's complete rewriting that can then be detected from a software for artificial intelligence generated text, or even worse, plagiarism. Because ChatGPT, for example, will not tell you if that specific sentence was taken from a published paper, and that might get you in trouble because then another software, we use Authenticate, will see that that specific sentence is copied from a different publication. So again, it depends if you're trying to refine a little bit your writing style, or if you're using that in a more robust way. So to answer your question, I will be extremely careful about using that. I think you'll be better asking a colleague that is fluent in English or a native speaker to give you some suggestions.
Great, thanks, Alberto. So I want to respond to the questions that are about the different types of research that are eligible for submission to the conference. So first of all, I would say I would encourage you to look at the conference website. There's a lot of detail regarding what is eligible. I haven't seen case studies previously, so I would just want to double check that before giving you the answer. I have seen systematic reviews as abstracts at the conference, so those are a possibility. We do also have qualitative and quantitative data. You'll see that there was an implementation science track, and that we had that kind of option B for like lessons learned and best practices from certain types of interventions. The other thing to answer Linda's question here, which was, can I submit work under review in another journal? I'm not sure, to be totally honest. I think that what you would want to do again is check the site. We definitely are not looking at science that's been submitted elsewhere. So I'm not sure if a full article is in process or under consideration, if it's eligible. So I would want to double check the site. And then maybe last but not least, there's many ways to come to the conference. You don't just need to be an abstract writer. Our conference is open to everybody. It's not a closed conference where you have to be an abstract author to have attendance. There are also workshops at AIDS conferences, as well as a Global Village program that has a number of opportunities. And also someone's full participation in these different components of the conference is considered within their scholarship program application. So I would recommend reading more about what the scholarship program entails, if this is something that's of interest to you, and know that the scholarships are very competitive.
Thanks, Anna. I'll take one or two. There's a person asking about the use of many or most, especially with qualitative results, because I think I passed the message that we should not be using those words. No, if I did pass that message, I was wrong. The idea is that you can use those words, but they need to be supported by quantitative data. So in the example that we shared before, we omitted part of the results. I think the sentence was most children, and then something else. The actual sentence was most children, and then parentheses 98%, and then something else. So you can use most, but it needs to be supported by specific quantitative data. And even in qualitative research, you should be able to say, how many of your participants, express that, whatever you're measuring. So it's okay to use them, but they need to be contextualized, within some actual data. And then there was another question about abstracts presented at the conference, whether they need to be accepted for publications elsewhere. No, we actually don't want that, because that would qualify as plagiarism. So that the data that we share at the conference is the newest data available, to a point that it should not be published anywhere else yet. So it's your first occasion to share your data.
I agree. So it's actually the opposite, just to be even more clear. If this work has been accepted elsewhere, it's not eligible to be presented as an abstract at the conference. I was just typing to Tembekile, who said, on the terms that can be used in populations, I saw people living with and affected by HIV. Is it okay to use the term people living with HIV? Absolutely. So the comment there was dependent on the population of interest. So if your intervention was for people living with and affected with HIV, then that would be appropriate. But if your study was specific for people living with HIV, then that would be the correct language to use. Absolutely. So thank you for that question.
I'll take one order on the meantime. Can I submit an abstract on a study conducted in 2020, for example? So novelty is one of the criteria that we use to score abstracts. Now, the question is this the only or most recent study on that specific topic, which means 2020 is not such an old set of data, or are there many other studies that have been conducted between 2020 and now, which means your study is not that novel anymore? So you will need to see, what is the state of the research nowadays, relative to your study, and whether that, qualify your study as novel or old.
Great. So I was just typing to Ayok, who had asked, how do we get an invitation letter to the conference? So you will get an official letter once you have registered, and this is the letter that you can use both for travel and any visas that you might need. So you have to have completed and paid for registration for that to come through. Asani, just to say, as mentioned before, I have seen systematic reviews and meta-analysis accepted to conferences, absolutely. And I saw as well a colleague asking about a master's project and whether they could submit for input. I don't think that that would be quite appropriate. There may be part of your master's work that is research focused and you want to submit the research from a master's project. That would absolutely be considered, but not a proposal for a master's. It's not a way to get feedback. It's a way to showcase science. Just on Rajesh's comments at the end here on Indigenous people, the IAS has a specific definition of who qualifies as a key population. So for us, key populations include gay men and other men who have sex with men, trans people, people living in prisons and other closed settings, people who inject drugs, and sex workers. So we know there's a number of definitions, but this is the one that the IAS uses at the moment. And I would also say, you know, no one likes being kind of put in a box. And so if your research is on a key population, I would recommend defining what you mean by a key population rather than just using this term, given that this term means different things to different people. So a degree of specificity is always important. So given that we have 2 minutes left, I would recommend, if Alberto doesn't object, that we move forward to the next slide. We really want to sincerely thank the JIAS Educational Fund Scientific Writing Workshop sponsor, who is the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, SDC. And the last slide here, we would really like you all to share your input on what you thought of the session today, what you took away from your time with Alberto and I, and how you think this could be strengthened and improved for future workshops. I want to acknowledge the comment in the chat regarding the desire to have translation in future webinars and appreciate that there are many different language speakers. I do also want to emphasize that for AIDS 2024, this is an English conference, and so all abstracts need to be submitted in English in this instance. And with that, I will say goodbye and leave the last word to Alberto.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anna. And thank you, all of you, for participating in this workshop. We hope this is useful. We will be sharing the recording of this workshop in the upcoming days or a couple of weeks. Feel free to check out the JIAS webpage and the International AIDS Society website. We have a new platform called IAS Plus, where these workshops and other educational material will be hosted. So we strongly encourage you to make good use of that. And we hope to see you at the conference in Munich next year. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.